Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on your lunch break or maybe your beer break or wine break or whatever luxury you get to have today. Hopefully, some of you have escaped Florida's August heat and enjoying a little bit of cool wave up north somewhere. My name is Rory Harding. I am the Vice President of Property Management for Condominium Associates. And I've been in this business a little over 10 years now. And so I've had lots of fun, lots of budgets, lots of projects, and I'm going to tell you I am not the expert. And I'll get into that as we go through the presentation today. So let me share my screen. I'm hearing that someone's saying there's lots of echo. Diana, are you hearing me okay? Is there an echo
I
from
can
me?
hear you okay, but there is it sounds almost like wind or something.
Let me turn that down a little bit. Is that better? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Maybe that's a little better.
Okay. Perfect. All right, let me share my screen and we'll get into these slides.
Rory, you want to talk about the format a little bit today?
I am.
Oh, sorry.
It's in my slide. Jumping the gun on me. So everybody can see you see my screen okay? We're good. Presentations there. Budget season roundtable. Promoting best practices and collective wisdom for our board members. So here is the goals of today, right? Promoting collaborative discussion. That is what this is about. You have your question and answer section there for your button to push. And we highly encourage you to ask questions as I speak and go along. Diana's monitoring that. I'll actually have questions for you so you can share some best practices that you have, right? And so that's why we have the emphasize shared responsibility. We're going to talk about what you expect from your manager, what the board should be doing, what a committee should be doing when it comes to budgeting. We're going to focus on strategic budgeting and what that is, and then ultimately the shared practices and collective wisdom in the room. And I'll get into that a little bit as we go along. So why budget season matters. Some of this might sound a little elementary, but it doesn't hurt to kind of go over the basics from time to time. But sometimes we got to think of things a little bit differently, and the more of us that have conversations about it helps. So point number one, budget is a leadership tool, not just a ledger. And we're going to talk a lot about strategic planning and strategic budgeting. I've been in this business a while, and thank you for the board members that are in here that volunteer their time and service to their communities and to their unit owners. But strategic planning and your budget is really a leadership opportunity for you and your community. So the foundation for the association's financial health is based on budgeting and predictive planning as well. It has a direct impact on your dues, reserves, and your services. And you'll hear us talk a little bit about services as we go through these slides, because often board members and unit owners, they'll approach the budgeting process as, I don't want my assessments to go up. Whatever we got to do to keep the dues the same. I mean, it would be great if we lived in this magical world, we could actually reduce the dues. And there's a cost when we approach budgeting that way. And there are things that need to be considered when you're doing your budget. Obviously, reserves. The state of Florida has made that a bigger issue for everybody. And then the other less known thought about process is the services that you're offering. And so it's making sure that the board is putting together a budget that aligns with their vision of the community and the services that your unit owners expect to have and how to pay for those. Legal compliances, fiduciary responsibility. You have responsibility to your constituents to make sure you're spending their money wisely, and that takes planning and time to do that. And then obviously the legal compliance world, that's ever changing rapidly for us in this industry, and just being able to keep up with some of the laws and the new things that are going on. And then budgeting has that opportunity for strategic planning. So here's a little definitions for the difference between a traditional versus a strategic budgeting. Traditional budgeting features traditional budgeting is static. It covers a 12-month period and focuses on controlling expenses. It is typically reactive with limited involvement beyond finance staff. And I would say there's a big chunk of this industry that's what it comes down. We get to this time of the year and we say, oh, it's budget season. And we're running around trying to put these Excel things together, and we're trying to, find those pain points and cram it into a budget. And, I don't want to leave the next board that's taken over into some wild problems, but I want to solve a few, and I don't want to raise dues, right? That's a very static kind of approach to it, and not really being strategic. So strategic budgeting characteristics is it looks ahead 3 to 5 years or more. So it prioritizes long-term outcomes, and it's proactive. It involves collaboration among management, boards, and committees. And so if you are, in my opinion, if you're starting your budget now in August, you're following the more of that traditional budgeting feature. To me, strategic budgeting is something that takes place all year long, and having those plans come together. So collective budgeting may be something you haven't heard of, but committee or not the committee, right? And there's different views on that. And so leveraging the group of mind for better decisions. So multiple minds. So involving all stakeholders in financial planning is strategic, and that gets back to this leadership part of budgeting. And so there's this wonderful test that was done in several books out there, business books. It's called the jelly bean jar story. And this is where they, and sure, if you've been around some carnivals or fairs or church gatherings or something, there's always this jar full of jelly beans or gumballs or whatever, and you guess how many are in it. You get to keep the jar at the end of the night. And as they look at that, and they have a list of 100 people walk through this jelly bean thing, and they're trying to predict how many jelly beans are in the jar, there are definitely outliers. There's definitely people that are way off. But when you take the average of the entire 100 people, the number comes within 10 to 15. And so, and the idea being the more minds in the room, the better chance we have at getting it right, and zeroing in and accomplishing what we need to accomplish. All right, so here we go. Diverse input leads to better budget. So diversity brings unique insights and experiences. And so when you try to put a committee together and you invite involvement from your community, you have lots of diverse experiences that are living there, that have a different business experience and industries, and have dealt with budgets and people and repairs. And, you'd be surprised sometimes at all the different experiences that are out there. And so when you invite that committee and you invite your community members to have input, what you're really doing is you're encouraging transparency and accountability to that. And so, when you're going through the budget and you're doing the strategic planning part, what you're trying to do is to build trust and increase buy-in from your community. So many people come on and they have an agenda. I mean, they're tired of that broken fence. The prior boards never addressed that fence, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix the fence. And I think you're really doing a disservice to the community if you're not owning your whole fiduciary role there. And it's really about the vision for your community. And I think a board should really lay out what that vision is for the community, where they want to be at in 5 years, what they want the community to look like, what things need to be addressed. And as you look at that 5-year plan, you build those committees around it, whether it's budgeting committees, whether it's an enhancement committee that can really dig into these different things in the budgeting process, and you encourage that involvement. And what I have found in my experience, And board members get on the boards because they see a problem needs to get fixed. And some get on because there's nobody left standing that wants to get on that board and serve and give that time. But 9 times out of 10, they're there to fix one problem and not think through the strategies of long-term commitment and long-term designing where the community is going, and understanding those different roles. So part of today also is to kind of cover our management approach so everybody understands what our timelines are and kind of what we do on our end, and maybe some of the whys and some good practices. So the timeline for CA and your managers, your GL accountants are trying to finish everything up in June and get a good 6 month look at that, making some adjustments and what have you. And somewhere toward the end of July, your GL accountants are producing budget shells for our managers. And so we have a nice budget work app that follows the budget tracking process that our managers log into and our accountants log into, and there's a workflow for tracking things. And so we have this wonderful Excel sheet. If you've been with us more than 1 year, we'll obviously pull from last year's budget shell to put those things in there. And our managers begin to go through it. And sometime toward the end of July, beginning of August, they should definitely be contacting and communicating with all the board members on setting up some budget workshops and their budget meeting. And so what's the difference between the two? A budget workshop is really an opportunity for the board to come together and have a draft budget that your managers put together already, and to be able to ask questions and think strategically and give some direction to their manager. It's an opportunity if they want to involve the unit owners and allow them to ask questions, you can. You don't have to in those workshops. It's really meant for the board to work through it. The budget meeting, on the other hand, that's where you adopt your budget. That's where the official business comes together. And so there's meeting notice requirements to that, and making sure it could be different for your community and what your docs are. Some are 30 days, some are 14 days. But one of the important process is the timing of everything that happens. And so in August, our managers are really putting together the budgets for you and getting the rough draft that they've got together after they've done their work and suggestions to the board. We should have these dates set up because really the goal is to have your budget meeting done in October. And some of you are like, wow, that's really early. Sometimes I don't have all the information I need. But the goal to do it in October is so that the back end processes can happen and coupons can get to you on time. And we have room for, if there's an error, there's a mistake, where we can still get the budgeting done on time. If we're waiting to the last minute, you have to understand there's only 2 companies left that really print coupon orders. And so when you think of how many associations there are in the world, and as those things are coming in, the timelines start to dissipate for them to be able to push out the work. And like us, mailing becomes an issue for us. It takes 7 to 10 days for us to get a mailing out. And so what should happen at that point, after we've gotten past the budget workshop and the board has a meeting and says, all right, this is the budget we want to mail out, and set that meeting date to make sure we meet that schedule. Our manager then checks and balances, comes back. We have one more look at it as an accountant to make sure all the math is formulating right and there's nothing off. And then we produce the mail out. And at that point, there's 7 to 10 days for us to make sure that we put the notice together and make sure we're statutory compliant. That wording has to be a certain way. And so we need the time to make sure we can check that box to make sure it works. And then there's time for the mailing group to actually process and get it in the mail and out the door. And so there are a lot of times we get back toward this timeline, and we just can't. We try to accommodate everybody, and it gets us in trouble. We try to push out a mailing in 3 or 4 days, and we rush things, and stuff gets overlooked. And so we really need, as a company, as managers working with our boards in this relationship of doing a proper budget, have these timestamps really baked in here and working well within that, because the process is meant to stop problems from happening. And then the other thing that we'd really encourage, with the law changes and the availability to vote, it gets really confusing. We are really recommending everybody to move to e-voting if you're not already doing it. That just takes liability away. It gives everybody access to vote and to weigh in, no matter where they're at in the world. And we're not, worrying depending on the mail to reach us and to get lost somewhere. E-voting is definitely the way to go. And there's a lot more things to vote on now that you're going to with your membership. And it also allows you to do some of this collaboration. So when you build a committee out that's looking at building a budget over time, they can do some surveys and kind of get an idea of some of the service levels or things that the community expects. And so we get into the next point here is collaborative roles. So what's the board responsible for? What's management responsible? And what are committees, right? And so, in my opinion, the board role really is the strategic planner. They're the visionaries, right? These are the things we would like to see improve in the community. We're tired of that old gate. We're tired of that elevator. And so we have a vision of where we want to be at. And management's goal here is really to bring the structure, right? To help guide the board on the timetables, if you will. Here's the resources and tools that we put together. Here's the research and the data. Your electric bills have been going up or trending down, and these are the reasons why. And then your committees, I think, are really there at the discretion of the board. And I've seen boards use these committees differently. And there's a slide in here in a minute that kind of gets specific, but the board needs to be real clear with the committee on what their goals are. And it's an interface opportunity, right? There's only so many hours that you have. I'm sure you didn't retire to become a full-time board member 24/7 to run your community. And so getting committees involved and helping you do some of this research and helping your management team do some of this research to help put your vision together. The budget is data-driven proposals, okay? It's not, sometimes we get in these ideas and again, we're just looking at and I've seen it, right? I've seen, well, our water bill is a little high. We want to keep the assessments, at the same price. So we have to cut somewhere. And then somebody cuts the water bill while the water bill is trending up. Or they don't pay attention to the fact that, I don't know about your electric bills, but my electric bills this year had this wonderful little thing about hurricanes that used to be like $20 a month on my bills. They're like $90 a month this year. And so you can cut the wrong things if you're not letting the data drive what's going on, right? And so we go out and collect the data for you. We find out from TECO or from your power company what those increases have been approved by the state, and so what to expect. The same thing with your water bills. Some of these cities have increased water bill chunks to be able to deal with all the water moving that they find out after last year. Their hurricane systems, the water's not moving out as fast as it should be or appropriately. And so we really got to work from a data side that drives it. And then when we talk about strategic planning on this, and why I say that you should be budgeting or have a committee working on this, full time, is because there are things that you can do that protects, and these projects can't be done at the last minute. And so as you go through your reserves and you have a painting project a year or 2 years from now, you don't wait till that year to start working that project. You should start like this year. If you're supposed to paint next year, you should have already started toward the beginning of this year of a committee that's working on that, right? In some cases, you bring out the paint guys, they'll take a look, they'll do a chalk test, and they'll say, yeah, your reserve is spot on, you're going to need this, or your reserves are a little off and you can go another year or another 2 years. And so that drives what your budget season looks like and what your strategic planning looks like. If you know that, hey, we're going to paint and we're talking and we're using a committee, and we find out that the majority of the community wants to change the colors, it takes time to go through that process. And if you wait to the year you're supposed to do it, a lot of times you won't have the ability to lead your association and the way it wants to go, and you run out of time and you miss something. There are other things to think about that come up too. That just experience of doing it. Fire systems. You have this wonderful code in fire that if you can keep your alarm system going, you don't have to get up to date on the newest codes. But in some case, your fire panel is not made anymore. And so some companies do keep spare parts. And so, there's a question that needs to be asked is, hey, is the company, how new is our stuff? Is it still available? If it's not still available, is there parts that make sense for us to go ahead and buy now so we can extend the time before we have this major upgrade? And when I say that, I mean, one of the communities I was involved in, it became like a $7,000 part that kept their fire panel going versus the upgrade was going to be about $130,000. Right. And so strategic planning and knowing that these things are coming up and these committees that are looking at it on a regular basis can help plan for that better and avoid some of these last minute things. And then compliance first planning. We all very aware of the compliance things that are going on in the statutes, and I think you're going to hear more from management. We no longer have this wonderful cushion that says, well, we advised the board and the board made a decision. There are now laws that hold your manager and your management company accountable if a board's trying to make a decision that seems to go against the rules, that we have to make sure that you stay compliant. And so everybody needs to be aware of that. I'm talking a little fast. Diana, is there any questions that I might need to address that have come up?
Well, we have some questions in the chat, but we also have a hand raised. I just don't know if we have the ability to unmute that person. I don't think the webinar works that way. So Craig Masser has his hand up, and now Grace has her hand up. I just don't think we have the ability to unmute them. Can you put your questions in the chat, in the question and answer, and we can address them? Oh, one person is saying the audio is very low and getting worse. I can hear, but maybe others can't. Hand was up in the air. Okay. And Grace said the same thing. Okay. All right. But do you want to take some of these questions or you want to keep going? They're mostly questions about reserve studies, reserving and deferred maintenance. So I don't know if you want to keep going and then circle back to these.
Yeah, let me keep going and then we'll circle back in specific reserves and that kind of thing. We'll go through that. All right.
Perfect. Okay.
So why this process works, it minimizes financial surprises. When you have a group of people working on it, you're looking at where you're going and you're having a 5-year plan that you're looking at, and you're starting to look at these projects a year in advance or 2 years in advance. And, some of the things that you can do in that reserve study is you can actually go get a bid from a vendor that you're working with and say, all right, is that reserve off a little bit? Is it tracking? Is there something that we need to worry about 3 years from now that we can start to plan now and start to write into that budget? So it's not a special assessment in 3 years, if you will. And ensures legal and operational compliance. Again, it's all about having proper timing to do it. And if you got this process going on year round, you're able to keep up with that and make, sometimes you can make some reserve adjustments when you have an expert tell you, such as the painting. Somebody comes out and says, all right, it's not chalking, it's good. You can make that adjustment in reserves because you're relying on, that good business judgment rule from that contractor saying, hey, it's not, expired. And so it gives you some operating room on your planning of your budgets. Enhances board and owner confidence, right? How many of you got on the board because the previous boards were always doing special assessments, or is always, they're not addressing things that are going on? When the board is leading this discussion and you're creating committees that are looking at that 4 or 5 year plan, you begin to have confidence. You're building trust in your ownership that says you got a pulse of what's going on and you're really addressing things. Right. And again, it improves long-term financial health. It takes out the surprises. Going back to data and strategy, you're looking at historical actual trends. Again, we're not just trying to keep an assessment at a certain level. We're going to look at what's going on. And sometimes you can see what causes that. And that gives you some ideas to address it, to deal with water, to deal with a constant fence that's broken or whatever it is. Assessment of vendor contracts and forecasts. If you're doing this year round, you've got a committee that's working on it, you can go vendor by vendor and look at the contracts that you have, what the forecasts are for those contracts. It gives you an opportunity to have a better handle on holding the feet to the fire, if you're a landscaper or whatever it is, because it costs time and effort to keep switching from vendors. And so the more in tune that you are of staying on top of them and contracts expectations, and sometimes you can negotiate some decreases when you add some time to how long the contract is. And then you have legitimate conversations about forecasts. So, some kind of increase doesn't catch you by surprise. But these are conversations that should be going on year round with the different vendors. If you have an elevator, having your elevator vendor come out, or maybe a consultant that you can ask questions specifically about your elevator, whether something is going out, whether parts are available, and that kind of stuff. And so that allows that planning so you're not caught by surprises. Making sure you're using your reserve study to dictate what that 4 or 5 years looks like. Okay. And then you develop that strategic plan when you're looking at 5 years. So, traits of high performing budget committees. Here's the committee role. You make clear roles and responsibilities. A lot of times we get asked, well, hey, you're CA, you're a big management company, you should have these procedures and things in place. What you're missing is that you live in a community of individuals that have different opinions. And so buildings are different. People are different. Their expectations are different. And so just as this committee, it can have a different role or different responsibility from board to board to board, depending on your expertise and what you're putting on there and what you want to accomplish with them. And so really it's a per community kind of a thing on what you need, the information or what you're using the committee for, but it needs to be clear. And you can't just say, here's a budget committee, go to work. When you set out what you expect them to do and what investigations you expect them to come back with and what recommendations they're supposed to do, it helps you actually make informed decisions. Using of accurate historical financial data, right? Again, it's looking at history, time over time, and what's going on right now. And you can see trends in electric or water usage if people were here or not here. If you just look at a time where everything I guess the best way to look at some of these communities have been vacant since the hurricane. And if you just look at the water usage and this amount of time, you could miss it because now the buildings are being put back together and the people are going to move back. And so if you're looking at just the last 6 months or just the year, you might miss that when you're forecasting all of next year. And so you need to look back through that GL and say, hey, what did it look like? And I probably can't say it enough, and maybe I'm saying it too much, but I can't emphasize enough being proactive and forward-looking in your planning. This is why we do the strategic planning of 3 to 5 years out. That you're really paying attention to reserves, you're really looking at what's coming up to be done, where are you financially, and you're still gathering that data. That's being proactive. That's saying that I'm taking an interest in where the community is going and steering it. If you're just looking 1 year at a time, it's reactive. I'm doing with whatever the pain point is at the moment. And you're just trying to put out a fire versus making sure a fire doesn't start. And then open communication with the community. I've dealt with boards that fight amongst themselves. I've dealt with boards that fight against unit owners. And 9 times out of 10 in my experience is if the board can be more open in their communication, the residents that are fighting them generally don't have all the information, and so they think they would have a different decision. And generally, if you give all the information that you're using to make a decision, most will arrive at the same decision. There are always outliers. There's always that 5%, that just can't quite figure it out. But generally, I've seen communities kind of calm down and come together. The more communication, the more open you are about the community come together around the budget process. So what the best boards do different. Start budget planning early, right? And the first lift, if you're doing this 5-year plan, the first year is going to be tough because you're looking at a full 5 years. But after that, you're just looking at the 5th year and how things are going and what committees you might need to form that tackle strategic projects. Involve residents when appropriate. I strongly suggest you make at least one committee. You might make a couple of committees depending on the projects that are coming up. But part of what those committees should be doing is driving that communication with residents, and you're starting to see what the majority want and where they want to go, and you're helping that strategic planning. Use multi-year forecasting and align the budget with strategic goals. And so you as a board have got to drive that conversation of where we want to be 5 years from now as a community, what we want to look like, what things do we want not to happen again. If that fence is always broken, how do we make sure we don't get into a situation where it's always broken? How do we preempt that? Budget season red flags, rushed decision making, right? This is when and we saw a lot of that and a lot of different reasons, right? We were battling Sears things last year. We were battling the hurricane things here in Florida. And so there was a lot of rush decision making because we're up against a clock. Where if we're doing budgeting year round, really, and you have some committees working, it really takes away that rush decision making. It makes it more strategic and better decisions are made. One of the interesting things of one of the books I'm reading recently talked about decision making. If you have two options, more times than not, right? The majority of the time, more times than half, you've made the wrong decision. But when you add the third option, you come up with a third solution, you're trying to decide between the three solutions, more times than not, you get the right decision is made and it's favorable. And so slow down your process, make sure you're looking at all the angles, use your committees, use your managers to look into things, but come up with three solutions for a problem, and more times than not, you'll pick the right solution. Poor documentation and tracking can become an issue. What I see a lot of that is more in the portfolio management side, and it's understanding the relationships, right? The board in a portfolio scenario, the board has decided to use so many hours of a manager. And so at that point, you've elected to have to run certain things in the community, and there's so many hours to do things. And so where we end up having problems is tracking some of these things appropriately and staying on top of it. The other thing I see too is when you get around this time of the year, the boards have things that are going on, and you're still kind of piling those things onto your portfolio manager, and they're not thinking about the time that your portfolio manager needs to be able to set aside to work on your budget and look at it and prepare it properly for your community. So we can't have that same influx of projects and things that are going on in that manager's time because they have to dedicate it to this budgeting thing. And this budgeting is really what sets up your success of your community going forward. Another red flag is lack of resident communication. When you try not to, when you think everybody's against you and you're trying to do the right thing and you don't communicate, you can have an upwelling. I mean, it's definitely been an uptick on boards being overturned recently, and it's because they've lost this confidence, they lost this trust in their community, and you think you're helping, but I'm telling you, my experience is the more information you put out there, the more the group kind of comes to the same decision, and you're able to quell a lot of that. And then a huge red flag, I can't say enough, just because the rules have changed so much, is ignoring your reserve requirements, right? There are associations that are making decisions. They're saying, you know what, these general reserves, because if you're a condo and you're over 3 stories, you have these Sears now. And you're saying, look, these prices have really went up. I don't want to reserve anything for the general reserves. I don't want to reserve anything for the pool or whatever. Realize that you're putting in a bubble of special assessment. At some point when that pool does go, you might not have the funds to fix it, because you're making a decision based on not wanting the assessments go up. And I'm not saying that that's a bad decision, but what I am saying is lack of resident communication. Don't make that decision in a vacuum. Communicate with your community and say, look, this is the choices that we're faced with, and get an idea of where the community wants to go and document it. right? Because the other thing that happens is somebody moves in there and they're going to say, why did that board never budget? Blah, blah, blah. Well, if you've documented meeting minutes that, hey, we took a poll, we took a, I didn't make it in a vacuum. 75% of the community that lived there when this decision was being made wanted to pass the buck down the road. Great, you've communicated, and now everybody has the information. So don't ignore the reserve requirements. De-risking your budget, again, I started to sound repetitive, but use scenario planning. Use the what ifs when we talk about what happens if the elevator parts go down. Is that something we should keep in stock or not? I've seen pumps, I've seen generators that take 8 months to get fixed. And so what if? Do I have enough cash to overcome that? It's another problem I've seen is communities run their cash reserves so tight. They say, well, I don't have any problems paying the bills, but the reality is you're coming down to almost $0 at the end of the month. And so only takes one pipe that breaks, and now you don't have enough cash and you can't fix it. And then you're in a special assessment scenario. And so, the experts, I would say, they'll tell you, you want 2 to 3 months worth of cash sitting in the bank of what your budget expenses are. And that way you have the cash to take care of any of these unforeseeable things while you let some money come back in and you have some time to address it, right? It slows down the questions and the quick decision making. Insurance, I don't know how bad I need to go into that. We've seen that market go up and down and all over sideways in the last over the years. And so definitely make sure you're engaging your insurance agent and realize that they are throwing a dart at a board a little bit, but they're the experts in the room. For this season, what I'm hearing is that the insurance market is still softening. Even with the hurricanes that went through, what we found is most of that insurance stuff was flood insurance and not necessarily wind insurance. And that's why we're seeing the market continue to soften a little bit.
Rory,
Yes.
a lot of people are saying that your voice is getting lower. Can you get closer to the microphone or raise your microphone
Let me get a little
sensitivity?
closer and talk a little louder.
All
How
right,
about that?
thank you. Great.
Getting updated vendor quotes. You don't have to accept the contract that you have if you give yourself the time to do it. Again, strategic planning, work those budgets all year long, and have those vendor communications and get updated quotes. And then validate reserve contribution needs. You don't have to just accept what the reserve study says, but you have to have an expert that counteracts that. Going back to my paint illustration, you have a contractor come out and say, you've got the life left in it. That gives you the evidence you need to better plan and move that project just a little bit. But you have to have an expert tell you that. All right. Before I get into this discussion, I'm going to ask some questions, right? Because we're going back to that wisdom in the room. Let me answer some of the questions that have come up, and then we'll ask these questions, and you guys can give us some feedback that we can share with the room on some of the struggles and some of the successes. All right.
You want me to read them to you?
Sure.
So Jocelyn Sparks has a few questions. Reserve interest. She doesn't understand why we have operating income showing reserve interest. And then on the budget line, reserve interest when we can't spend it for operating expenses. Doesn't this misrepresent the operating income? Does Lola want to take that one?
Yeah, Lola, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I'll give exactly what it's required per law, and then we'll continue the rest of the question to try to answer. Since the law changed for the Sears and non-Sears, general and non-general, the interest reserves for Sears must stay with Sears no matter what. You can't use it, you can't devote the membership, you can't do anything like used to be before. Before, you could use the reserve interest for other items to be paid or move it to operating with a membership vote. However, with the new changes, you no longer can use the Sears reserve. It must stay with the Sears. When you do the budget, I from my experience, we never recommend to budget for operating interest or for reserve interest. So always these two lines should stay zero. Now, when the time comes, you're going to be able to earn some interest into the reserves. And is the accounting methodology for CIRA, Common Interest Realty Associations, that requires the interest be booked into the balance sheet, right? Cash to the reserves and on the income statement. But at the same time, it's not affecting anything on income statement. It's in and out. So I would leave these two lines blank. And then as we go down the year, then we'll book the separate interest. One line operating interest, the other line reserve interest. The reserve interest, it shows on the income part and it shows at the bottom of the P&L. Does this answer the fully question or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it, lays out what the law says, that where we have to show it on the financials. One of the things that I would point out too, that I've seen tried to be budgeted this way and should not, just like Lola said, if you're trying to budget the income on your budget for interest on the reserves, you're not following the law anymore, because all of your reserve studies is already accounting for interest earned. So it's already accounted in there before it's decided to tell you how much you have to reserve. And so if you book it and then try to reduce how much you need to collect, you basically double book the interest and you're breaking the law. Okay. And you have to reset that when you're looking at the reserves. You have to reset that income every year. It might say you're starting the year with 165,000, but you might only have 140,000. And so you have to rework that reserve schedule to make sure you're following the law and you're properly reserving. So there's some work that goes beyond, behind putting these budgets together, that your manager's got to have the proper time to do the research to have the right data.
Yeah, and I want to add, Rory, to here with the new law, the changes that came last July on the Sears reserves. I know I'm probably going to open a lot of questions after this, but I want to make everybody aware of the new changes that came last year, that you can use reserve interest earned during the year to fund the reserves. So that's something that we implemented. I've done it for a couple of associations. It's not easy concept to understand, and it's not easy to put it on a financial statements, but you can do that. So you can use the reserve interest earned during the year to fund the reserves. Now, I see the downside of it, because you don't really know how much you're going to earn in reserve interest, especially now that we expect low rates coming through, probably September, October, down to the year end. But the timing when you can invest and you earn that interest, you can use to fund the reserves. That's a new concept that is being thrown out there.
Okay. Yeah, another one, Diana?
Sorry. Yes, the next one was same person. I'm totally confused with what is meant by general deferred maintenance and capital expenditure account. How does this relate to my reserves? Is it an operating budget line that I use for these items not included in my pooled reserves? Is it the same idea as contingency?
It's a solid question, and it's loaded with lots of history and changing terminology over time. So capital expenditure account, usually those come, and Lola, you can correct me, usually those come from docs that require a contribution when you purchase your unit into a capital expenditure. So it sits in this account, and your doc would tell you specifically what that is used for. Typically, it's usually, to do an enhancement or something like that. That's
exactly right. Yes. Yep. Working capital contribution cannot be used for anything.
I'm sorry?
Working capital contribution cannot be used for any expense. It's designed to be used for a specific usage, which is specified by docs. And if it's not, then the board will discuss it among themselves.
So general deferred maintenance, this is somewhat an evil word in the past. They put these general deferred maintenance as a line item in their reserves, and it doesn't really specify what it is. And we don't like that. We don't like that because reserves say it's for a specific item and it extends its useful life, period. And so we highly encourage that this line item comes out of your reserve. Now, where you will see it today will be in your actual reserve study, but it'll be for a line item specific. Some of these things may never have a replacement in 30 years, right, how your reserve is laid out, but it has deferred maintenance that only happens maybe every 10 years. And so your reserve analyst will put in, hey, you got to spend $20,000 on the upkeep of this item every 10 years. And so that's kind of terminology is deferred maintenance, because it's not replacing that item, but it's doing a necessary maintenance to keep that life up of that item. And so, is it not included in my pooled reserves or not? You've got to read your reserves and see what your reserve advisor did specifically. It can be different on case by case. And, the other thing that's going to come up too about reserves, several people were still able to waive funding of their Sears last year. And now we're into this, you can't now. It's over. That ship has sailed. And you really got to pay attention to the starting balances that your Sears reserve that you got done last year that you might not have started funding yet. You've really got to pay attention to the balances that they started with to make sure that you set that up correct in your budget. And then you have to your manager is going to have to work with our accounting team to make sure we divide those pooled monies up or whatever into the Sears and the general reserves that happen for those that have Sears reserves.
Yes, and I'm answering many of the questions. If you want to go back to the chat, I'm typing the answers, as many as I can as I'm reviewing them. So I'll kind of chime in if you need help with.
Sure.
The next one, you ready?
Yes.
We had a reserve study done last year. Are we obligated to put aside reserves for every item listed, or just those specified as required in the legislation? And once again, deferred maintenance is mentioned in the deferred maintenance mentioned in the legislation, and how can deferred maintenance be an operating budget line and a reserve fund?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of deferred maintenance being an operating budget line item, because to me that is kind of a contingency thing. It really needs to be spelled out, and so I think that would fit better of saying exactly what it is that your maintenance that you're doing that year or what have you, versus just a catch-all line. It does sound like that kind of more of a contingency line item than a planned event. As far as the reserve study and all the items that are listed in. So there's two different ways of doing reserves. You have component funding, which would be each line item, and you're saving for each line item, and you see each line item kind of on your financials. And then there's the pooled method, where they take all those line items and account for what you're going to do to replace them, but you're only looking at how much money you need each year of what's going to be expended, and you can use all those different line items that you're saving for together for anything that's being done that year. And so when the legislators, are specific about that and you have a reserve study, it's prudent to follow the reserve study that you have, right? That's the best practice. That's the expert that's come out and said, this is what it's going to take to fund these things. HOA reserves, you have the ability to take a vote to underfund those reserves. For condos that are under 3-story habitable stories, you can underfund your reserves as well. It takes a membership vote, at least half the community. And then for those that have 3 habitable stories or more, you have a Sears report now that you cannot underfund. And the Sears are those structural items that you think that protects the building. So paint that keeps water from coming in and destroying the building and those kind of things, roof entry points. Those you cannot underfund, but you'll have general reserves that should be a part of your report. So like a pool, parking lot maintenance, those kind of things that don't have to deal with the structure being held up, that you can underfund. But again, this and kind of what we talked about, these are all discussions and decisions that have to be made that you should bring in the community and explain why you're making the decision that you're making.
All right, that was good. The next question is a continuation. Has the dollar value for deferred maintenance increased from 10,000 to 25,000?
Right. So if you're talking within your budget, that was a decision made by a board to put it in there. And I don't know for what reasons of notes were made. For a reserve item, it should be spelled out by your reserve analyst who did it. And again, it should be specific. And then you'll know what's being done. You know, if it's a seawall, it might take 50 years for a seawall to be replaced, but we know you're going to have to do maintenance every 10 years. You need to invest $100,000 every 10 years. And so it'll be specific to those things.
All right. Some good questions today. When a reserve study gives a recommendation for a contribution, the interest accumulated this year would be an addition? Question mark.
So again, look at your reserves specifically because they're putting a couple of things in your reserve studies now. They're putting an inflation factor in, and so they're anticipating some increases in cost of things, and they're actually putting in interest earned. And so they're putting that toward the balance if it's a pooled funding or what have you. So they're calculating that in every year, and they'll tell you at the beginning of the reserve analysis what those factors are and how they're doing it. And you know, some years you might make a higher percentage, you might make a lower percentage. That's why it's important during the budget season that you start with the starting number that you have to dictate the rest of what you should be saving.
Okay.
And
Diana,
there is another question that I want to answer because I know where it's coming. But where we are finding reserve study costs are seriously using low numbers compared to the bids. An example are roofs and its hull. Definitely, as long as you take 3 bids and all 3 bids are lower, are more, right, more than reserve study, I would suggest you have a reserve study team, an interview with them and let them explain why they're using low numbers, what the bids are. Rory, Diana, you might have an addition to add to this.
Right. So it depends, usually it depends on how old your reserve study is that you're working with. The other part, when you go through one of these reserve studies, they really work with your manager or your board, and they're asking for data that you might have accumulated. So when's the last time you replaced the roof? What did it cost? Have you gotten a quote recently? And generally what these reserve groups do is they'll create a database of prices in certain zip codes or certain areas, and that's what they're pulling from. You have this type of roof, this is the last few quotes that we have in that area, and that's where they come up with that number at. So that's also strengthens how often you should do that reserve study. And you want less hiccups and more time to plan, I would do those reserve studies, you know, every 3 years. The Sears statutorily are required every 10, but you know, that sort of opens the door up for a surprise, in my opinion. You know, as we've seen in the past, inflation and things can happen, and that number can drastically change pretty quick.
You might see the other side of it. You may see that reserve study has low numbers asking for the contribution, but you as a board have decided to fund more. So I had a question yesterday that came up and says, well, if our board is voting to fund more reserves than reserve study requires, then do I need to update the reserve study? You should follow the law and you take it from there. But in my opinion is like, why you're funding more when you're required to fund this much, right? You open another can of.
I have seen a situation where that's happened, and the reason being is the reserve study they did their Sears early at the end of 2023. And then they knew painting was coming up and they got paint quotes because they were going to do it a little bit. And after they got paint quotes, after the reserve was put, they found out that the reserve study was rather low on the painting. And so knowing that, they chose to reserve more, keep their fees up because they know there's this bubble that exists. And that kind of goes back to that strategic planning where you're testing what your reserves does by talking to vendors and getting quotes and getting prepared for that. And so now for them, the painting is looking like 2027, but 2024, they know it's off. That's given them an extra 3 years to save money towards that the reserve portion was off. So that might be the reason why a board has chosen to reserve more than the reserve study. Again, that comes to communication. The more the board can communicate on the decisions that they're making and show those proposals and those quotes, it helps everybody understand.
Oh, there is another question. If my Sears reserve is too low for the cost of painting the building next year, how do I account for the additional cost? Exactly like Rory answered it. Based on the bids and quotes, which I would be probably requiring 3 or 4 of them to go over, and each one of them have a different specs. So you gotta be sure that you're looking exactly to the same, comparing apples to apples. Then you count for that additional cost into the reserves before you approve the budget for 2026.
Right. So that reserve expense, you put it right into the cash flow analysis. And so if it's in your Sears and it's laid out at 100,000 and you've got bids that say it's going to be 300,000, you change that expense for next year or 2 years from now when it's going to happen to 300,000 in the reserves, and then adjust that cash flow on out, and that will account for how much to save for it. And that's, you're making it, that falls in that good business judgment rule for a board, right? We have an expert, we've got a quote that says this is what this is, and so we're making that adjustment to make sure we don't have a surprise 2 years from now.
That's right.
See, the questions are slowing down. So, all right, for the experts in the room, those have been doing this a little bit, what's the best budget decision your board has ever made? Anybody got examples they can put in the chat and we'll read it out? Or here's a pretty good one too. What expense caught you off guard last year? We can share their wisdom. Maybe we missed budgeting something, and this one everybody should look out for. Or I know some of you are laughing at me going, get a committee together. Nobody volunteers for committees at my place. Maybe somebody has a good practice that they use to get residents to get busy and helping out.
So they are putting comments in the Q&A on your questions. So one says pooled reserves. So they
That's the best.
misjudged the pooled reserves. And one is suggesting to invest our reserve money for better interest. Another one said plumbing and legal. They misjudged plumbing and legal. So lots of good lessons learned here. Investing your reserve money, we have to follow the statutes, right? So you can't do anything too risky, or I don't know if Lola wants to answer that comment, because there are guidelines that we have to follow. But do you want to answer that one, Lola?
Well, I need to, yes, give me a, can you repeat that question again? I was trying to.
It was a recommendation to invest our reserve money. And so I'm just saying that there are guidelines to that we have to follow, right? Maybe you want to talk about that just for a second?
Absolutely. As a company, we provide the association investment policy that it's depends on the board if they wants to adopt the investment policy or they wants to follow one they already have it on their files. So when it comes to the investment, our company assists. We have a banking department. We call it banking. There are 3 employees that assist. They are very well versed on communication and with the board of directors. Usually the treasurer is the one who communicates on the investment. Per new law, there is no requirements for the board of directors to decide on the investment. So you don't have to have a board meeting to decide what you want to invest. We prepare a bank rate sheet. It's part of the financial package that is released every month. And that bank rate sheet compiles different banks around locally that helps us with the good rates. After you review that and you already have the investment policy on place, then you'll reach our banking team, which is at banking@condominiumassociates.com email. Vanya leads the banking and she will be able to communicate directly with you, either by Zoom, phone call, or anything like that. We try to put a strategy together. We don't really do it for if you're trying to invest $50,000, that's your decision. But if you have millions, especially the insurance claims, they're not going to be used the right way. We try to put an investment strategy for you. Our bank, well, not our bank as a CA, but the partner bank that you use, Popular Bank, has a really great programs with a CDARS, CDs, and their terms starts from 4 weeks, which is called laddered CDARS, and then you can reinvest as you need it. I hope this answers, but if you have any other things, then I can be help of. Just reach me directly.
Very good. So one of the participants said that the best decision they made was to follow their reserve study, but they did have an unexpected expense of sinkholes. So that's rough. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's rough. This one said, for example, if I anticipate replacing a fire panel or a generator, and that was not part of my Sears study, can I add them now?
Yeah, the generator, I'm not sure would be part of the Sears, but for sure the fire panel should have been part of the Sears. That is definitely a Sears item. But yeah, no, if you, again, good judgment rule. I wouldn't go off of you saying I think a fire panel is X, but if you have an expert who's come out and said your fire panel is going to need to be replaced and this is what it cost, then you're relying on the expert opinions, and you can absolutely put that into your Sears report. And if that is missing from your Sears report, I would definitely go back to the vendor who created that and ask the question.
So I did want to circle back. Doug pointed out that yes, general reserves for condo and co-op, the minimum required replacement costs to be included has been raised from 10 to 25,000, and that's per HB 913, which was just approved on July 1st. So that's new. That was good. Good question. Thanks,
so that
Doug.
might be why the dollar amount is there, but I don't like it because it's just random. It should really be tied to an event with a specific
Right.
item.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Doug. All right, do we have anything else here? I find a lot of reluctance to create committees for anything. They're too busy. Just like we find reluctance to get people on the board. It's the same. It's we're all busy. It's hard. Yeah. Getting people involved who care, and it's a challenge. Any comments there? Any suggestions from anyone?
Yeah, that's the one I was really relying on the wisdom in the room.
Right, right. We need
How did you
people,
get some of these
yeah.
committees to go? Because you probably don't like my answers. I mean, I'm going to paint this building pink and I'm going to spend $10 million and the special assessment's coming. Might get somebody interested to jumping on that committee.
Right, Right. Well, here's a good one. Maybe this would get people involved in the community. If your condo association underfunded its reserves through 2025, do we need to make up the shortage in 2026 along with the required reserves for 2026?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I do have some responses from really great treasurers that says the best budget practice that they're using for the high rises, they are ensuring that both reserves and Sears used amount reflects building needs, not the market value. So that's a really
Yes.
great approach on this.
Yeah.
And regarding our residents' feedback, the best results were with a live conversation versus long and back and forth email exchanges. So
Yeah.
you have those workshops before the budget, and then it will open a lot of great feedback from the residents, because that's what we are for, to build a harmony in the communities.
Sure. And Evan, going back to the 2025 reserves being underfunded, that's really captured by the fact you start with your starting dollar amount every year of 2026. So your manager is looking at what the reserve should land at, and they're making that prediction of what it's going to be starting January 2026, and that's the number you plug into that cash flow that will make those adjustments on how much you have to reserve on out. So you actually make that adjustment every year. Yep.
There is another question, Rory, that it's talking about the shared expenses between associations, which I advise to look the documents carefully and reach the attorney as well. And they're saying that they have the same issue with the shared roads, but they're working with the attorney to propose the shared maintenance agreements with other associations that they share the roads. Usually these are very well defined in the governing documents, especially the percentage of the expenditures that you have to do for the shared roads. But I'm guessing not all properties have such. So the best answer would be work with your association attorney. That's the final resource that you can use.
Carolyn comments that the best budget practices ensure that both the reserves and the Sears use the amounts reflected in our buildings, needs not market value.
Yeah, defining what specifically the cost of that replacement. Again, that's you got that committee working all year long. It's checking those numbers by getting the input from vendors and cost analysis, right? Just capturing that. I see this one says, I'm a new treasurer. What are the best ways treasurers should be involved in this process? To me, again, it goes back to understanding your board role and helping that board set that strategic vision for the community, and then be available to answer questions from the committee and be specific on what the committee needs to do. Yeah. And then the treasurer sitting down and working with your manager as well, right? Looking over the work, looking at the whys that your manager made, the suggestions they made for the certain line items, and then making sure that the data is driving the decision making, and not I just want to keep a certain assessment, or I just want to XYZ. Let's look at how to not let fires happen, and how do we do that? What are the problems that exist, and how do we make sure it doesn't become a problem again? We have a whole training department that's doing budget training and board trainings, and some best practices and things, how to read financials and understand that, because sometimes the volunteers, as noted, gets a little bit thin, and someone ends up being the treasurer because they were forced, because no one else raised their hand to do it, and they don't have the confidence and the experience of dealing with looking at it on paper like that. And so we recognize that, and that's why we do have some trainings for that, specifically on how to read financials. And let's face it, Lola will tell you, Our accounting is a little bit different, being fund-based accounting. And so those that do have experience sometimes don't quite understand totally because you just don't come in contact with this on an everyday basis. So I encourage everybody to be involved in those trainings. And that's a little bit of my last question there that, was a little bit of a joke, but serious, best practices on handling the committee member who just doesn't math, right? I've had those individuals who I've explained it at least 4 different ways as best I can, and it just won't connect. And how do you handle that one committee member that just doesn't allow your committee to move forward because they think they're right? So a little bit of a joke, but it's a true thing that happens out there.
Yes, there are a lot of questions on asking how do we find these training sessions you're referring to, CA, and absolutely we'd love to share, especially with the board orientation. We do a lot of board orientation. If there are multiple new board members coming on board, I'll let Rory and Diana, but I'm typing on chat the person who you'll contact to schedule an appointment and a training with our director, our training department. And Doug leads the department, so.
Right, and we just sent out our first Community Compass newsletter, our external newsletter to our boards, letting them know there's links to click on for trainings coming up. So that one was just sent out at the end of July, and the next one should be coming out August 29th. So if you didn't get that, send me a message or Doug a message, and we'll get that schedule over to you so you can click on those links and get registered for those classes. Absolutely.
I see a question here that says we're paying the city of St. Pete $4,100 a month for a line item called stormwater management. What does my community get for that? Yeah, that's one of those fun fees where the cities haven't been using their reserve studies to maintain things, and now city of Tampa is the same way. You've gotten into these situations that we've got major stormwater repairs that have to happen to get this water to keep moving like it's supposed to move, and so they tax everybody who has a water bill, and they end up paying this stormwater fees to help make the system better. And St. Pete, like I said, is not by themselves. Tampa, you go look up to Tampa, and for something was like a 5-year plan of increases to address stormwater movement.
Oh, there is another question. How do we sign up a course of reading financials? Same way, and we'll be able to help and share with the board of directors. Constantly, we kind of share articles regarding the financial statements, but the board orientation will have a course for it too.
Yeah, it's a great class that they give on how to read the financials, how to navigate our website, any other questions that come up. So there was a question earlier that I was gonna.
Yeah, there is another question. Our board refuses to address specific issues from the owners that was the responsibility of the committee until the committee was staffed. So I'm sure Rory and Diana, you'll answer.
Your board has a responsibility to answer to the homeowners and be as transparent as possible, but they might not have the answers, right? So that's part of the transparency and getting that committee set up to help find the answers and search solutions and things like that.
And then we have one that was helping us with contingent things. If you have a contingent line item, it might include things that are not in your series, like deductibles, your insurance deductibles, sidewalks and sewers, where they have this really long life. And so there's inspections and things that need to be done, just regular maintenance. So you have a contingency item for that. And engineers, you might get into a situation where it requires an engineer to do a study or what have you. And so it's a good practice to have a contingent line item year over year. That's where you're planning that what if scenario, depending on what the needs of your community have. And the whole idea for having that year over year, so you don't have that special assessment, right? That the cash is there to address what the community needs to address right then. And then, the counter to that argument might come and says, well, if we've had a contingent line item for 5 years and no one's ever used that number, there is a case that if you have built up a certain amount of reserves, if you call it not, like operating reserve cash, where your bank at the end of the day and the operating account has 5 or 6 months of money, you don't need that. We can write that back into your assessment. So I wouldn't adjust your budget, but what we can do is put a line item of income in there that offsets what you're collecting. And so you kind of draw that back down a little bit year over year. You wouldn't make it disappear. But I can tell you, more times than not, most of our associations are running on the too thin side. And we're always faced with how do we pay for something? How do we deal with the emergency? And it usually causes more costs when you don't have options because it limits you.
Yes, there is actually a statement, a feedback, which is great. And one of the board members saying that the financials are difficult for many owners to understand, or the boards, so they come to the wrong conclusion automatically without knowing how to read the financials or how to work through it. And he said that he found the financials similar to many nonprofit financial systems. So that's what Rory was mentioning, fund accounting. That's something that we really, it's easy to think and read it, but sometimes it's complicated applying with the Florida statute. Not only condos, not only HOAs, but the co-ops, timeshares, every other Florida statute, master associations. So we really, as a company, have a long practice and experience on following the state law. And we're not finding that among other management companies that are taking new properties on board. So that's where we work together. Interest income, it's taxed at 30%. Any way for condos to deduct against that? Yes, there is the CPAs, the independent CPAs who prepare the tax return. They will give the working trial sheets that shows what they deduct. That's an IRS regulation. We can't kind of, go lower than 30%. But what happened is that the CPA counts a lot of other items on expenses that brings that tax lower to 30%, lower than 30%. Financials over 800 pages. Yes, you are a large property. Large property. A large,
Yours-
it's here for
Yours
us
are,
to well.
yours are
Very long.
unique.
Full
Yeah.
business technically. So yes, they are 800 pages. Not really, but 500 and some pages. Yes, you are correct. They are. We try to be as transparent as we can. I strongly suggest every board member that is participating today read the first 2 pages, 3 pages of the financial packages. They gives you a lot of information, and in addition to that, they are on a second page. There is a link that directs you to the Florida statute you belongs to, 718, 720, or the co-ops, and 619 as well. And the first page includes the links to the website that directs you to a lot of training materials as well.
We do have a comment in the chat saying that regarding resident feedback, that their best results are live conversations. So we agree, sometimes just talking to your homeowners and helping them understand is definitely the best practice, in transparency and helping people understand the difficult decisions that the board has to make to take care of that community. So that's great. Looks like all the comments are slowing down. I'm just checking to see if we missed any.
So the key takeaways from today: budget is a leadership tool, not just a ledger. It's not just an accounting. It's how your board leads your community and where you're going. Collective input creates stronger outcomes, right? The more people you have in the conversation and doing the work, the more options that can arise from that, and the better chances of a great outcome. Communication is critical, right? Helping your residents understand the tough decisions and all the pieces that rely around that, and getting feedback from where your residents want to be. And I can tell you that changes over time with a building, or an HOA with the community that moves in and moves out and those kind of things. So it's keeping the pulse on where people want to go. And then management provides structure, right? We're not the decision makers. Your board is the decision maker at the end of the day. And so it's up to your board to provide the strategy, where they want to be at, how we're going to fund these things. And the management provides the structure for doing that, making sure we're following the laws, and, can give advice.
Looking for more questions.
Yeah.
I did email out a sample of a budget committee charter, which gives responsibilities and guidelines for that budget committee to those that asked for it. If there's anyone else, just put it in the chat and I'll try to get it out to you as quick as possible.
And again, it's a sample, it's a guide.
It's just a sample, yes.
Yeah, I encourage you to take the ideas, but utilize the talent you have in your community in the best way for those charters and what you have going on. Somebody said thank you for doing this. They enjoy this new communication, and it's an improvement. And we are definitely enjoy doing these things. We're going to continue to do them. And again, if you have ideas on subjects that you think, hey, I could get some help if I can hear some wisdom from other board members in the room, kind of thing, please send us those suggestions.
Oh, Rory, I would like to share the slide with especially for 718 and 720. Would you be willing
Stop sharing.
So it will help
Okay.
to read. So you see the screen, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I would like probably everyone to look at this screen, and if you need to take a picture, it would be great, or we can share this slide. Especially it will help everyone when the board prior approving the budgets for 2026, correct? And it's per Florida statute. It requires, which is the Florida Administrative Code as well, if you fail to include the beginning and ending the dates for the budgets, we are trying to eliminate all of these things prior the draft comes to the board of directors. So when it comes to the board of directors, all the things that you see in there have been looked from our management, from accounting, and then comes to you as a clean draft. If you fail to include the reserve schedules, we have received in the past a lot of budgets without a reserve schedule with snippet of the reserve study. That's not what the statute requires. The statute requires to provide reserve schedules to the membership and mail it to the owners. The same thing is about Florida Administrative Code 61B-2022-005. Includes that if association fails to fund reserves in a timely manner along with the SEERS requirements, and the new law is in effect of January 1, 2026. Then SB 154 made a lot of changes on the waiving the reserves for the majority of the owners present. or the Sears and structural items. So associations that are subject may not waive the reserves per Florida statute as well, 718 and 719. Hope this helps. And if you have any question, put it on chat, right? Rory is yours.
Okay.
Sharing this. Rory, you can share yours now. If you...
I'm done. There was nothing else left for me to share. We finished. I don't see anything else. So, all right.
They're asking that please have the duration of the presentation accurate in the invitations. We expect to have a lot of board members asking questions. That's why we put this duration of the presentation lengthy. We like to cover as much as we can. I know sometimes it's a lot to cover, but we want to give you a lot of feedback before we start running those budgets, which is lovely time for all of us.
Yeah. You know, we never know how much participation or little participation or, you know, so you never know what you're going to get when you do one of these things. I think the presentation portion, we try to gauge that to be an hour max. Usually it's much less, and then allowing time for discussion and questions. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly why it blocked off 4 hours, but thank you so much for participating. I know I have a few more here that I need to email the charter to. So let me just jot down names before we.
Dana, do you need help with the questions?
Well, I don't see anything else. I'm just glancing to make sure that I capture everybody's name who wants the charter. Because I think if we shut down, then I lose that, right?
And
Okay.
there's a way to provide the PowerPoint presentation to those that signed up. We can do that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Sure.
AJ can help you with that. I asked him if somebody asked in the chat if they could have the answers, the Q&A in the chat. Oh, and he's answering yes. So he's going to capture the Q&A chat, and we'll include that with the PowerPoint slideshow.
And Lola, can you send your one slide to AJ as well?
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, they're requesting that too.
Well, there are a couple slides actually, but we may leave those for later on. There are a couple other slides how to calculate the bad debt, especially now that we're seeing delinquencies increasing across the board, especially on the condos. HOAs are not having a lot of delinquencies, but condos are starting to see a rise on delinquencies. I would say that calculating the allowance for bad debt, it's very important for 2026. And
Yes.
we're training our team to make sure that we capture as much as we can.
All right.
All right. Diane, did you get everything you needed?
Well, I can probably get this from AJ too.
Okay.
Yeah, Carolyn, we're going to include Lola's slides in the email that we'll send out to everyone. May have a sample pooled reserve schedule. Do you have something like that? A sampled pooled reserve schedule?
I can include actually 3 slides of my DBPR course presentation with for the group, and it's going to help them. They can see what the requirements for the straight line and for the pooled reserves are. So I can share them with the group along with the first slide that I shared with. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. This was awesome. We appreciate you signing on with us today. It's been great. And do you want to, can I take a minute to tell you about some other things that we have coming up? We are doing our Communities Connect event November 6th at Ruth Eckerd Hall. So we're hoping that all of our boards and future boards and all of those things will join us out there at Ruth Eckerd Hall. That invite will be coming out, sometime, kind of a save the date, but it will be November 6th at Ruth Eckerd Hall. I believe Doug is going to be offering his 1 hour recertification. So for condos, I think it's for condos now, you have to do an additional hour every year to refresh. So hopefully he's going to be have an opportunity to offer that for our boards, along with some other exciting stuff. So watch for that communication. We're excited to roll that out. I don't know if there's anything else. It's budget season, so we're kind of crazy people right now. Oh, Anonymous gave me an email address.
There is a question that will Lola be doing in 2026 budget prep webinar, or is this it? Depends on the request. Yes, I have done one last year, which was very successful for the feedback, and was done around end of July, beginning of August. But if we do have many requests, I'm willing to do the budget webinar. Absolutely. And I can do it before the month end or beginning of September, where everyone starts preparing the final drafts.
Right. Yeah, you want to let us, if you can get that on over to AJ, the date for that, then we can add it to our next communication and make sure that everybody gets it twice, right?
Good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Lola. All right, I think I got everybody. Charlie, I didn't see you on, Charlie. Nice to see you.
Yes, and they are more Diana.
Maybe we want to just send this to everybody. My list is getting long.
Yeah, I think you should share it with everyone.
Okay, so we'll put it with the slides. How's that then, instead of me sending this individually? All right.
And questions, are you going to remind us the budget due dates? So yes, the manager is working with the boards. I'll let you, Diana, answer
Yes.
this.
So budget workshops, I mean, managers are getting their budgets right now. They're working on them, preparing them, doing their research. And budget workshops should be happening in August and September. And then your budget meetings should be in October. By October 31st, if we could possibly have all those board budget meetings done, then your coupons can be ordered in plenty of time to get out to your homeowners. So get with your managers, schedule those meetings, and they'll let us know if they need help, or if you need help and you want us to join in and help with those budget workshops. We're making ourselves available to do that. So just let us know. We appreciate all of you, and we know it's difficult to volunteer your time. It's a hard job. All right, anything else to close us out? Thanks for joining us, Carol.
Thank you for the feedback, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
The
That was
next
awesome.
planning, we'll do the financial one.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Rory, Diana.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Lola. I appreciate it.
Bye.